Modern culture sells a very specific method for becoming a better person. You retreat, you work on yourself, and you figure it all out alone. If you try that and fail, the standard advice is simply to push harder. This obsession with the isolated individual mirrors classical physics. Historically, science measured systems by their absolute theoretical limits, like calculating the motion of an ideal pendulum swinging endlessly in a vacuum without any friction. The observer-dependent theory of everything has its own version of this frictionless pendulum. It's called a fixed point of self-observation. This is a theoretical state of total inner consistency, where an observer sees itself perfectly and maintains absolute, unbroken coherence. But there is a trap in this math. A mountain can exist, but that does not guarantee you will ever reach the summit. While this state of perfect self-consistency is mathematically provable, achieving it as a solitary individual is rarely possible in practice. Human beings are open systems. At every second, we exert energy. We act, we speak, we work. In total isolation, the energy required to maintain inner consistency simply runs out. You leak coherence faster than you can generate it. Solitude in this context behaves like a barrier rather than a release. Without an external source of replenishment, the isolated individual remains fixed in place, eventually losing the energy required to sustain their own progress. The roots of this isolated thinking go back to the 18th century, to the philosopher Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. He built a theory of monads, elementary units of reality that he described as having absolutely no windows. For Leibniz, every entity was entirely self-sufficient, completely sealed off from exchanging anything with the outside world. That model remained largely unchallenged until 1893, when a massive correction was proposed at a meeting of the Moscow Mathematical Society. The Society's president, Nikolai Bugayev, delivered a paper called The Foundations of Evolutionary Monadology. He proposed a structural shift in how we understand reality. Bugayev argued that these fundamental units of reality actually do have windows. They are not sealed inside themselves. Every center of action in the universe constantly interacts, forming a network of mutual obligation by continually receiving and giving out energy. We are not closed systems operating on our own private islands. The fabric of reality relies on a dynamic network tied together by mutual interaction. To accurately map this network, the math has to move away from static limits. We have to stop asking where we will eventually end up and instead measure our speed and direction right now. Because we are open systems, our internal coherence fluctuates. It drops when we expend effort, and it rises when we absorb something from the outside, attention, care, or new information. Growth only happens when your inflow exceeds your outflow. This constant need for external energy requires what the theory calls a collective attractor. A person embedded in a group is literally lifted by the surrounding nodes, drawing on their shared momentum to maintain upward motion. Without it, the isolated node drops. Empirically, you don't need a massive crowd for this to work. The minimum requirement for an intimate attractor is just 2 people. For a highly functioning working collective, the math supports a cluster of around 7. But this engine also runs in reverse. If you find yourself surrounded by suspicion, friction, or misaligned goals, the group operates as a negative attractor. It pulls you downward, accelerating your loss of coherence much faster than if you were standing alone. When an environment is actively subtracting your energy, the most mathematically advantageous move is to step away and temporarily accept isolation, rather than letting a dysfunctional group drain your reserves. Who you surround yourself with is the literal mechanism that dictates your trajectory. It determines the fixed point you are moving toward, or whether you are moving at all. This changes how we evaluate our closest connections. Traditionally, we picture ideal love as 2 people perfectly synchronized, knowing each other entirely, finishing each other's sentences, existing without friction. The math offers a rougher but more accurate definition. Love is the simultaneous, mutual growth of 2 individuals. It is a process where both people expand and become larger, specifically because the other is present. When a couple achieves high synchronization, but neither person has expanded in a decade, the relationship has shifted into a comfortable habit. The theory suggests that for love to persist, it must maintain its momentum. This dynamic feedback loop scales across the physical world. In this framework, an observer is defined as any self-referential structure that possesses inner coherence, from a single atom to an entire galactic cluster. Yet, simply fitting the definition of an observer does not mean you are shaping reality. There is a vast difference between existing as an entity in principle and actually exerting influence on the historical timeline. Your current coherence and inertia are only fractions of the equation. Leaving a tangible mark requires the multiplied effectiveness of the collective you are embedded within. If reality is completely defined by motion within a collective, how do we measure the actual weight of a human life? The theory introduces a metric called life density. Think of your lifespan as a trajectory drawn through reality. Density measures the specific energy and information weight of that path. It is calculated by taking your coherence at any given moment and multiplying it by the complete absence of inner contradiction. When your thoughts, words, and actions perfectly align, the imprint you leave is sharp and heavy. This proves that a long life is not always a dense one. You can live for 80 years on automatic pilot, repeating the same actions in a half-sleep, and leave barely a scratch. Or you can live 50 years completely awake, present, and aligned, leaving a massive impact on the common fabric. You cannot accumulate this density after the fact. You cannot reach the end of your timeline and decide to finally start living heavily to make up for decades of scattered, empty moments. The drawing has already been made. Because life is a continuous motion, the total weight of your existence depends on the specific decisions you make today. It relies on how gathered and present you are right now, and the people you finally choose to grow alongside.